This video is going to talk you through question 3a, which is the how useful are sources X and Y for inquiry into, and then whatever the inquiry happens to be. Now, this is a familiar question style. As I've previously mentioned, this is on paper 1 on the Western Front section. So you're fairly used to this question, and you would have been looking at this question style in year 9 as well. And there's a couple of things that we get wrong sometimes as a cohort, but if you just follow some straightforward guidance and really focus your attention on the correct part of this question, then you will do well on it and you will score well. So the structure is PIPCAL, and PIPCAL enables you to achieve all the features of the mark scheme that you need to on this question. And I think the key thing to emphasize here is that this is the skill of sources, which is AO3 on the mark scheme. This is not the skill of understanding causation and causes and analysis, which is AO2, and it is not understanding and providing knowledge, which is AO1. So that's where some of you go wrong. It is all about the source analysis and what the source reveals to us and what it tells us about a particular inquiry, a particular topic. Now, the inquiry is on women and Nazi policies towards women. And you can see that is the question here. So how useful are these sources? So the key thing is to consider, what does useful mean? Well, it means helpful, or it means what does it reveal, or what does it actually tell us? Do the sources that are provided actually give us an insight into Nazi policies towards women? I want to stress this as well. This is 2 PIPCAL paragraphs. Each PIPCAL is for each separate source. So in one PIPCAL, you shouldn't be mentioning both sources. It should only be one. Then the other PIPCAL paragraph will be the other source. So please do keep them separate. It's quite important you do that. So I'll just briefly talk through the kind of main feature. So the key thing you must do is provide a point. Now, this is the main reason why the source is useful to the inquiry. You're always going to get the sources. They're always going to be relevant to the inquiry, always, but you have to state why. And this is about you providing the main topic, the main reason why the source is useful. And my advice is to always be positive and say that it is, rather than saying that it isn't. So, for example, you're going to do your answer here. There is just space here for notes, but the first thing you need to do is to say source, and whatever the source is, B is useful for an inquiry into Nazi policies towards women because it reveals or provides an insight into, and then whatever the topic happens to be. So if we look, for example, at source B, we can see that it says the birth rate, German women, German men, the birth rate in Germany is rapidly declining, so a major change is needed. We believe that German women must use their strength and abilities in different areas from men. Let me say this clearly, the first, best and most suitable place for the women is in the family. It is her most glorious duty to give children to her people and nation. The woman is the teacher of the youth and therefore the builder of the foundation of its future. If the family is the nation's source of strength, the woman is at its center. The best place for the woman to serve her people is in her marriage, in the family, in motherhood. That's a speech made by Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister for the Nazi regime, and very clearly, when we're thinking, what does this source tell us about Nazi policies towards women, which is the question, it's clear that women's role was one of domestic role. It was in the home, it was to provide children, it was to look after the home and the family. So that's what you'd say for the first one, really. It's useful for an inquiry into the Nazi policies towards women because it reveals to us, the Nazis aim to make women into domestic people, really. That was their role. So that's the first thing, and it's really important that you get that bit right. You don't just say source B is useful because it's a speech, or source C is useful because it's a photo. You must reveal what the main topic of the inquiry is. The next section that you'll do is obviously the inference. And you can only make an inference from a quote or a detail. Now, it's quite common that you will get a piece of text, a source with text on this question, and then it's usually quite common that you'll then get an image as well. And you seem to struggle more with images, but there isn't much more to it, and I'll explain how to kind of tackle that issue. What you need to do is, again, you need to find a quote from the first source, and it needs to be relevant to the inquiry. Don't just pick out a random quote. You've already stated in your point that this provides an insight into whatever, that women were central to the domestic issues in Germany, Nazi Germany. Well, that was their main objective, was to provide children or be family, main center of the family. You then need to find a quote that backs up that point. So there's many different quotes that you could have, and you take that quote and then you reveal and you tell the examiner what that reveals to you about Nazi policies. Okay, so make sure you use the sentence starter of, for example, in the source, it states, and provide your quote. Okay, so you've shown that you've looked at the source and you've provided a quote. Then you need to make an inference. So this suggests that, and then that's your inference. Okay, remember, an inference is reading in between the lines. It's not stating the obvious. Okay, you need to reveal or explain what the quote reveals about Nazi policies towards women. Okay. For the picture, for the image, it's obviously you don't have a quote, but you just need to see what you can see, really. So a detail from the source. So you might note that this is a factory, and all I can see is women. I can't see any men. What can you infer from that about Nazi policies towards women based on the source, whatever your main point happens to be? The next stage is the provenance. And the provenance is really important because as historians, we use sources from the past to provide us with information. We need to consider where that source has come from and why that might add value to this source, make it more useful to us as historians. And a lot of the times it's just you using your common sense, really. You know what makes a source more useful to us. So this is a speech made by Joseph Goebbels in March 1933. So again, we're using here the nature, the origin, and the purpose. So the nature, we know, is the type of source. The origin is when the source was made, where it was made, and by whom. That can reveal a lot. And then obviously the purpose is then why was the source made. It's usually easiest to kind of consider the nature of the source or the origin. So, and again, you're not always going to have all the information to hand. You only need to do one of these features minimum in one of the pip calls. So here, for example, you could look at the idea that it's 1938, and again, you might explain why that adds value to this source. Think about what's going on in 1938. Think about where it is. It's in a factory. Why does that make this source more useful to us? Why does it add value? Or the fact that it's a photograph Again, don't go down the route of it can't be photoshopped. It can. So why might a photograph add value to a historian? Consider what a photograph does and how it helps us understand more about the inquiry. Same with this, it's a speech. So again, think about why speeches, what speeches are for, why that might add value to the source. Think about the author, it's Joseph Goebbels, if you know who he is, why might that add value to the source? And again, March 33, so why is the date significant? Why might this add value as well? Make sure you use the sentence starter. The value of the source is increased because, and then you could use one of the nature, origin, and purpose of its nature, and then explain obviously why that adds value to the inquiry. Pip, that's what you've done there, and that's the most important part of the entire question. You have to reveal the point, you have to provide an inference, and you have to analyze the provenance. If you do that, you're going a long way to answering whether these sources are useful for an inquiry. The last part, the last two parts, is obviously providing the knowledge. So again, you don't need loads and loads and loads of knowledge in this question, but any knowledge you do have to support the inquiry is helpful and useful. So you want to use the sentence starter. Usually you might remember this, is it typical? Are we reading these sources and are we really that surprised? Does it support our own knowledge? If it does, this shouldn't be surprising, okay? So we might say, the source is not surprising given that, and you would provide a piece of knowledge. So if you have a piece of knowledge to do with the birth rate or any Nazi policies towards women in the home, domestic ones, you'd then include that piece of knowledge. Furthermore, for the section C, source C, again, if you have any knowledge of women working in factories, you would then add that knowledge as well. The final thing is the link, and the link really is just you making sure your paragraph is sustained and that it is linking to the main point that you made at the very beginning. So, so overall is a good way to do it. The main value of the source is that it provides us with an insight into, and don't just say Nazi policies towards women, say what your original point was, so it's sustained. Okay, so that's how you answer the question. So again, you might want to, when you have a go, so the video will go here for this that I'm doing right now. You've got the then you've got the questions, and then you'll write your answer in this section here. Okay. 15 minutes is what you would use on this question usually, but if you save time on the explain question, you can give yourselves up to 15 to 17 minutes on that question. But again, make sure you time yourself and don't spend too much time. Remember, it's two pip calls, it's one quote and inference, it's one piece of provenance, it's one piece of knowledge. Yeah, so don't worry about writing loads. It's out of 8. Just remember that. Okay.